HathiTrust member meeting. I'm Jessica Rohr, she, her, member engagement and communication specialist here at HathiTrust, as well as the chair of the 2022 member meeting planning committee. Before we get into our complete agenda, I've got a few things that I want to cover. So first, please be advised that all HathiTrust events, including this one today, adhere to our code of conduct, which appears in the chat and also here on the screen. It's coming up in just a minute. Thank you for making this and all our events a safe and welcoming space for everyone. All attendees, as you can see, are muted and off screen upon joining. Our presenters today will, of course, be on screen, and there will be several opportunities for you to join in the conversation, either in chat or in your breakout rooms. The chat is enabled for questions throughout the event. If you have any problems with audio, visual, any questions during the appropriate time, put them in the chat and we will both get to the questions and try to resolve any issues that you might be having. Next slide. We do have closed captioning, and we also are very lucky to have Catherine Thomas joining us today as a live transcriptionist. So we will be making that transcript available after the meeting. And as usual, there will be, this time around, probably fewer creative spellings of HathiTrust, but those are always entertaining when they happen in YouTube. So pass those on if you still see them. Next slide, please. If you're tweeting today, and we encourage you to do so, we are at HathiTrust, hashtag HTMM22. So if you hear something you like, please do pass it on. And finally, next slide, please. We want to hear from you about what you think of this meeting in real time. If you've attended in the past, you may notice that we've taken a different approach to the meeting this year, and we're eager to hear what you think. And if this is your first meeting, we also want to hear from you. So we'll be asking a few questions in Zoom during the breaks, and we are also taking your real-time feedback throughout the meeting on our Jamboard. The Jamboard link is in the chat, and we'll post it several times during the meeting. So again, thank you for being here today. We look forward to hearing what you have to say during the meeting and also in the Jamboard. At this time, I am going to turn it over to Holly Mercer to lead us into our full agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. And I also want to extend my welcome to everyone. It is great to see so many of you able to join the member meeting this year. So the bylaws for HathiTrust require an annual meeting, but besides the requirement, it's a great opportunity to get feedback from you, the members, and to talk about what HathiTrust has been developing and plans to develop. And with that in mind, this year's theme, Constructing Shared Culture, Building Vision, Values, and Strategies for the Future is really timely. In 2019, HathiTrust launched a 5-year strategic plan. And now as that plan is drawing to a close, it's a great opportunity to really focus on, reflect on accomplishments and then look ahead to an emerging strategy for the upcoming years. And so the agenda for today, you see it on the screen. So Mike Furlough and Jenny Steele are going to have a conversation about Mike's report that was delivered via video this year so that there's more time for interaction. It'll be followed by a break and then a Board of Governors panel discussion. And after that, there will be another break, and then the facilitated breakout sessions. I'm really looking forward to those, and I hope you are as well. I want to thank the members of the meeting planning committee. You see their names and affiliations on the screen, and also take the opportunity to thank the members of the program steering committee. The names you see in bold are the individuals who are also contributing to this member meeting in some way. And so a special thank you to those program steering committee members. And then the list of the current board of governors, and again, the names that are bolded are contributing to the meeting today as facilitators or panelists or speakers. And finally, the new board member for 2023 is Gohar Ashugian from Wilfrid Laurier University. And we look forward to working with her over the next few years. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike. Thank you.
Hello, I'm here. Jenny, are you here?
Yep,
There you are.
I'm here, Mike.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. Good talking to you today.
Yes, I totally agree. And I want to just reiterate what Holly said about this session. We want it to be interactive. So I encourage everyone to please type any questions you have into the chat. So let me begin with introductions. I'm Ginny Steele. I'm she, her pronouns, and I am the university librarian at UCLA in Los Angeles. And as I begin, I would like to acknowledge that UCLA recognizes the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tobangar, which includes the Los Angeles Basin and the South Channel Islands. So I'm here today in my capacity as past chair of the HathiTrust's board to have a conversation with Mike, and where we'll discuss a range of questions, issues about HathiTrust, and then give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. Before I do that, I did want to say a little bit more about the Board of Governors. Holly has talked about that. I just wanted to say that it is made up of 12 members. 6 of them are appointed members by the founding institutions that created HathiTrust. So that's the University of Michigan, Indiana University, the Big Ten Academic Alliance, and the University of California. And then there are 6 elected members. So if you are interested in serving on the Board of Governors, there are opportunities every year. There's an election, and Gohar is our newest person to join the board, but please think about it, because having governance from the members is very important. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Mike to introduce himself and say a little bit more about how HathiTrust operates.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so I'm Mike Furlough. I am good to see all of you again. My pronouns are he, his. And I am, just to kind of clarify who I am, what I do, I'm the person that the board hired to make sure HathiTrust works, right? I'm here to kind of make sure that we maintain a thriving organization, that it's in tune with our membership and our community. I spend a lot of time thinking about our organizational growth and health, financial planning, strategies, direction setting. A lot of what I want to talk about with you today, Jenny, and with the rest of you. And then, you know, kind of working with the HathiTrust team, it was a great group of folks, kind of making sure that we're able to carry out the work that we've committed to do and that you've asked us to carry out for you. One other thing I just want to say is another governance body. I spent a lot of time working with the board but also in particular with the program steering committee as well. The program steering committee is another standing committee that HathiTrust has. And I wanted to mention this because I realize in my video recording, I make some reference, and I tend to throw around the names of the board, the program steering committee acronyms, as if everyone knows what they are. I want to just make sure you're clear about this. Program steering committee is a really important group. They work with me, with the board. They're really there to advise the board and me in setting our overall strategic path. So the chair is Denise Pan, and some of you will be meeting with her later today in one of our breakout conversations. Let's see, what else can I tell you, Jenny? If you give me just a second, I guess I can talk a little bit more about where we are and the staff, if that's helpful.
That would be great.
So we're hosted at the University of Michigan. I think a lot of you know that. We are kind of resting within the university library, if you will. And the employees of HathiTrust are all employees here at the University of Michigan, but we operate with a great deal of independence and autonomy. And I'm really accountable to the board and to you all in the membership for this. The staff is not really large. Right now, my team is about 15 people. When we are through filling a number of positions, we expect to be around 20 or 22 sometime in the coming year. And that's very exciting, but it is a small staff. I still know everybody by name, so it's not that big yet. But here at Michigan, we operate the programs, the services, the administration of the organization. A lot of our infrastructure is based here, user and member support, all of that carried out by the team. And then the other point I wanted to make in terms of setup is that if you recall, we do also rely pretty heavily on some other members for providing critical support for operations. So the HathiTrust Research Center is based at Indiana University, the University of Illinois, led by a team at those two institutions. And then a really important part of our operations is metadata management that's hosted at California Digital Library. And we work really closely with all of these groups to kind of carry out the broad umbrella of programs and services at HathiTrust. So I hope that intro is a little bit helpful there for you.
Yeah, Mike. So one of the things that I often wonder about, and I get asked in terms of the library at UCLA is, are you being affected by a lot of turnover in staffing? And also, how are you handling the question of remote work?
Good questions. So turnover it's a really interesting question. And I tend to fool myself on this because we have had a very stable staff for a very long period of time. And in fact, if you look at our current staff of 15 people, I think about 12 of them are the first person hired into that role. And the average tenure of our team, at least my immediate team, is about 5 years. So there are a few people who have been here with us for longer than I have been with HathiTrust as well. But on the other hand, since last summer, we've had 3 folks leave, 2 to take on new opportunities that emerged that were interesting and exciting to them. And then 1 person who just wanted to have more flexibility in her work schedule and take on some more consulting roles. So 3 people in a year and a half is about a 20% turnover rate, and that for us, and you can't deny that has an impact on your work, on what gets done, how you prioritize, how you flow things through, and we've all been making adjustments, I think, fairly well with that. Luckily, we've not had a whole lot of trouble hiring. We've been successful even in hiring a developer recently. So we've been very fortunate in not having, really extended or failed searches or anything like that, like I think some folks have had to deal with. Part of the reason for that may be that we've kind of made it kind of a default for us to work, give folks the opportunity to work remotely if that's what works best for them. So when we recruit positions now, most of them make it clear that relocation is not required, it is an optional for them. And that way, and we've been doing that for some positions, at least since 2016, on the assumption that it helps us recruit a better pool of applicants, a wider group of folks, and gives people the opportunity to kind of adapt or kind of mix their life and their work together in a way that works for them. After the pandemic, or at the advent of the pandemic, we all, of course, work remotely, and during that period of time, we understood how we could do that effectively for all of us. And so now we are fairly much hybrid. And so there are folks who work primarily from home. And then there are some of us who come into the office a few days a week. And some of us are still, kind of trying out one model or another for that. So at least that's where we are right now. I won't say that we won't ever have someone who needs to work on site. That could happen, but I think that really will be dependent upon the job and what's necessary there. And we haven't yet posted a position that requires that. So,
Great, thanks. That's really helpful to have a sense of what the organization really looks like, how it functions, and how many people there are to do all the things that you're trying to do. So that sort of leads to this question of developing a strategic plan. In your video toward the end, you talked about a process that's being launched informally today to develop a new strategic plan. And there has been a plan that's been in place. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what the major accomplishments have been in terms of meeting the goals and objectives laid out in the previous plan, and then what you see in terms of process for developing the next strategic plan.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And that's true. I mean, this is a meeting that for several months, we've been talking about internally as kind of like a launching pad for the next round of planning or visioning, if you will. So in 2018, we confirmed a new set of strategic directions, and we adopted that word. I want to be clear. We adopted that word strategic directions fairly deliberately, because we did not believe at the time that we could clearly and definitively plan all the work that we would need to do or want to do over the next 3 to 5 years. And boy, was that right. The idea was to kind of lay out a roadmap of activity around and objectives that were organized under some themes. And for us, the themes that made the most sense were to talk about the work that we do to empower the organization and the members to enhance our programs and services for the benefit of the users, and to help transform the community in which we work in library and information resources. And I feel like we've had some really significant successes in all of those areas over the last several years. One of them, just in the area of like strengthening the membership, one thing I want to highlight is that we in 2020 launched and developed a new membership fee structure that was intentionally designed to help make the membership more affordable for institutions with smaller budgets. During the last 3 years, we've added more than 70 members to the HathiTrust membership, a very large number of those coming from that class of institutions, that tier of institutions that we really wanted to have become part of HathiTrust and extend benefits and partnership with them. And I'm very proud of that. And under the area of services and programs, I talked about this in the video, but I would highlight in particular some work we've been doing to try to think about strategic efforts and being more intentional in curating and stewarding the collection of HathiTrust. If you think about the collection over time, it's really kind of aggregated from mass digitization. So we've adopted this past year a set of collection principles that are intended to guide our future strategic development of the collection in partnership with our members. We've also really been taking a hard look at how we manage and steward the metadata resources that our members have offered to us to provide access to the collection. And we're trying to think about we are examining how we will take a more active role in working with our membership to make sure that material stays in sync with records of record, if you will, that they're up to date, that they're of the highest quality, that they're using current terminology and not including outdated and harmful terminology. There's a lot of work to be done there. And again, we're still trying to figure out the best way of tackling that, because some of it's going to entail some significant system redevelopment at some point over the next several years. So there's some work to be done there. And then in the area of what I call transformational leadership, one of the things that I would highlight there is just really the focus that we really put on ensuring that there would be continuity of service in libraries during the 2020 pandemic. That was not a planned objective, right? We didn't certainly sit that down and say we're going to launch during a pandemic, a major service. But for us, I think that was a really critical thing to do, the necessary thing to do. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, the most important thing I think we've ever really done. I'm getting a little bit long-winded here, but I know you wanted me to talk a little bit about next steps. And I'll just say that what we're expecting in the coming year is to launch a new visioning process that will, I want to characterize it as being a little more, I don't want to call it radical necessarily, but I would want to say more, potentially more closely examined, a more closely examined set of issues for us. You know, taking a look at the impact we have had, taking a look at the value that we are trying to bring to members and to users in the community, and asking, are we meeting those objectives? And from that understanding, really taking a hard look at then, how do we want to execute our purpose? How do we want to carry out our purpose in the coming 5 years, if you will? There is a very different world that we're in today, not just because of the pandemic, but because of an evolution of time. The community that we work with today is the same, many of the same people, but the issues have a different valence today. And I think that we at HathiTrust want to make sure that we are thinking about how to use our resources in the best possible way to kind of work within the needs that are emergent now and into the next several years. So I hope that's helpful as a starting point for an understanding of that. So
Yeah, good. So going back to the question of collections, as you described, the membership of HathiTrust has grown significantly, and the institutions are more diverse than before. And yet you also, when you talked about collections, you also talked about giving them focus. So how are you thinking about ways to expand the collection and the roles or potential roles that member institutions might play?
Yeah, let me offer a couple of thoughts there, but I also want to talk a little bit about challenges, because I think this is an area where I think we need to give a fair amount of thought. The collection that HathiTrust has is, as I've noted before, aggregated from materials that were scanned from member collections. It is a collection that's largely, primarily, exclusively, really reformatted, primarily published materials from academic research libraries, and most notably from about 6 or so libraries. And that collection has a lot of, I don't want to call it, it's a lot of defaults, right? It's like what was on the shelf when mass digitization began, that was shaped by then various decisions that have been made over time about what should get into collection, and then what was most readily accessible to scanning, our scanning partners at Google, what could fit on the scanners and that sort of thing. So there wasn't a lot of, I don't want to say there was no decision making, but it wasn't like the kind of curated collection development that we do in our libraries, where we think critically about what the resources are needed and get them. It's more like what can be made to fit the pipeline, right? And a lot of good has come from that. That can sound really negative, but there's 17, 18 million volumes of material that are now in digital format in HathiTrust that were not there before. 7 million of those in the public domain, broadly readable. It's undeniable. There's been a huge impact there. But what we're trying to do, and I talked about this a little bit last year, and I'm still talking about it because it's really difficult, is understanding what it means to have this collection relative to what else is out there in the world, and what else is, and really what is not in the collection. I try not to talk about gap filling anymore, because a former colleague, Lizanne Payne, pointed out, really it's all gaps. Like there's this broad universe and spectrum, and you have like pieces of it, and it's like you're not going to fill gaps, you're going to like gradually take on more stuff maybe. And so I think we're trying to understand through the collection principles, what that does is helps lay out some markers for what is critical in making decisions about where we would tune our collection development efforts, right? It organizes, it's kind of giving us an opportunity to think about how we would orient our work towards equity, towards justice, towards inclusion, towards representation, and asking the question of what users, and users in a broad sense, many different kinds of users, need from a collection like this going forward, and how we get that material in there. I think the members have to be critical partners in this, because number one, they have a closer connection to collections and current user needs than we might in our seats here. They also are the caretakers of various collections, and they know what is being needed and what they're prioritizing and what is not in HathiTrust. And so I think we really will continue to rely on the members for being not just like, sources, and that sounds negative, but or functional, but really advisors, and help set directions for us and help us understand where we would go. There's a real challenge though, and I don't want to get away from this. I think if we are going to continue to focus on HathiTrust being a collection of reformatted materials, and we could scan forever probably, we have to acknowledge that the resources aren't there in the way that we might want them to be to scan at the volume that a large commercial agent like Google was able to. There's a lot of interest in seeing more materials move to online that are in print only. And I think there are folks in the world who believe libraries aren't moving fast enough to do that. And I would challenge those folks to come to us with funding to help us get that work done, because it is not a matter of indifference. It is really a question of where the funding comes from and how that balances out. And to be clear, libraries scan a lot. There's a lot of digitization that's happening, but it's still at a slowish pace compared to the scale of what could be done. And if you look at the HathiTrust collection in particular, you think about it as published materials scanned from books. That is not an area that libraries have heavily invested in on their own. There's locally scanned materials in the collection, but really only about 1% of the collection has come from local scanning efforts. A lot of that was outsourced. So I think I do not have an answer for this. I want to be clear. And, we could devote a substantial amount of our annual budget to funding digitization. It would still be have a minimal impact, I think, relative to the scale of what we might want to accomplish. So I don't have good answers here. I do think there are other questions we need to be asking about collection other than digitization as well, but I'll leave it there for the moment. So.
Yeah, and I would just say from the local perspective, certainly we talk about digitizing more from our collection, but the issue of resources is the really critical one. We just don't have enough money to spend to hire all the staff and have all the equipment and do the kind of large scale work that Google did do. I mean, they got a lot done, and I think we should be grateful to them for that. But I wanted to move on to sort of the next step in terms of thinking about collections, which is building a sort of North American shared collection, and all the commitments that go into not only having the digital version, but also having the print versions as backup. So this whole area of shared print is one that we've been discussing quite a lot. There have been a number of library meetings about shared print. There are organizations that have started up in the last few years that are really focused on shared print. So, and in your video, you talked about 8 libraries that HathiTrust is working with as pilot libraries to cooperate in the area of shared print. So one of the things I wondered about as we think about shared print is, are we also thinking about quality control for the digital version of materials that are in HathiTrust? And I ask that because we had a situation at UCLA where we were approached by the Jewish Museum of Prague about 3 titles they had identified in HathiTrust that were looted from their library in just before World War II. And they asked that we return them, repatriate them, which we did. But before we did that, we went in to check the quality of the scans, and we found that one of them was really almost illegible. So we ended up rescanning it ourselves so that all of us collectively would have access to it. But I wonder if that's a part of thinking about both shared print and the existing corpus.
That's a really good question. I think, let me talk about shared print and quality. I'm going to probably take them in the order that you addressed them there. So shared print. So in I did mention this in that presentation that this past year we've launched a 3rd phase of our shared print program, which is more focused on, more specifically focused than our previous phases. And to be clear, we've been working on shared print since deeply since 2017, when we launched a program that have secured retention commitments for about 5.8 million titles in HathiTrust. And I'm going to botch the numbers. It's something like 18 million commitments from about 75 to 80 libraries that are committing to retain these volumes. For 25 years, they match items in HathiTrust that they have on the shelf. What we did not do in those first rounds, though, was put any conditions on or put any requirements around condition check or limiting access to the collection. We kind of took the point of view that with more commitments, there are greater assurances of survivability, if you will, of material. And I think that is true. But when we look at the collections across the board for HathiTrust members, we can see there's a really substantial number of titles and items that are relatively rarely held. And in fact, for most of what we have in libraries, we can adopt the theorem that Lork and Dempsey posited several years ago, that rarity is common, right? There's some stuff that was heavily duplicated. There's a lot of stuff that's not that heavily duplicated. So anyway, within the HathiTrust membership, there's a number of titles that are held by only 1 or 2 libraries. So what we're doing in this third phase is we're working with 8 libraries, and to give them credit, which I didn't do in the previous presentation, those are Tufts, Colby College, University of Wyoming, University of Alberta, Texas State, Universities of Toronto, Illinois, and University of Michigan as well. And they are making a commitment to take certain titles that are in the public domain, move them into a non-circulating or limited circulating status, so that there is less risk to the physical volumes themselves, and then also do a condition and completeness check on those volumes, so that then there is some assurance that we are retaining a copy that is in good condition for future use. Now, I want to give full credit to Heather Welton and the members of the Shared Print Advisory Committee that have worked this through, and they really thought about this as a pilot to help us understand how we can do that work at a larger scale. And what we're trying to understand now is what's the time effort required to do that work, how much does it cost, how would we pay for that at larger numbers going forward? So we'll know more about that in the coming year. We did not, and I'm going to acknowledge what sounds like folly here, we did not make a part of that project quality checks on the digital scans. And that was really a practical decision to be made. We made in order to keep that pilot project manageable and to keep the focus on something we didn't have a lot of experience with, which was validity check, condition check, physical paging of volumes and that work. There's been a lot of work over the years looking at quality in HathiTrust. There was a large IMLS grant about 10 years ago that pointed out a number of issues at that period of time. And many of you may recall that when mass digitization began, the hue and cry was around. It was really easy to find exemplar, terrible collection scans, to point those out. And I think what we learned through that is that both through those experiences is one, there's always going to be errors and there's always going to be issues in scanning when you scan at that scale. And what we need to do is focus on how we correct them when we become aware of them. And that's the strategy we've had to take, just because you can't easily quality check 18 million volumes as they come in. But that said, I think I want to point out that one thing we're trying to do in this shared print aspect right now is have those something we've never done before is we've asked those libraries not just to make those materials limited circulation, but also commit to scanning copies of them if we need to have another copy inserted into the collection. So if there's a quality issue with an existing volume, we know we could go to that library and make a request for a scan to replace it, and that gives us some greater assurance of being able to make sure we can meet user needs on that. There was something else about all that. Oh, just to note too, that I think over time, our major partner Google has been working to improve quality of scans, and no doubt you'll find part of Google Books quality scans with fingers in them still. But overall, there's a much more rapid turnaround improvement of quality and a more steady, I think, increase in the quality, especially around OCR and image processing as well. So
that's good to hear. I mean, I think for many things the scans are fine, but some of them they just aren't. So it's good.
I think that's right, and it's always a question too of like, what does it fit for purpose for, right? And I think that you have to acknowledge a lot of the scanning that has been done was in order to ensure legibility of physical text blocks. as opposed to capturing all of the details for book history or for preservation purposes. And so within that, then what can we do to make sure that text block is actually legible, right? And images are legible as well. And I think that's an important point that we always got to pay attention to. So.
Right, right. So also in the video, you talked a fair amount about access, and you noted the significant progress that's been made in terms of identification of public domain materials. And I want to congratulate you and everyone who's worked on that. I think that's really major. But in terms of thinking about access to in-copyright materials as well as public domain materials, but primarily in copyright materials, are there models that you're thinking about or directions that you want to go? Is this something that you see as being a consideration in the new strategic plan?
Mm-hmm. Great question. And this is a really complicated thing to figure out and to think through, because if I could wave a magic wand, there's a lot of things I'd change, and the Copyright Act would be one of them. And so what we've really tried to do over the years is make sure we're responsible and careful and thoughtful about how we provide access to material within the constraints that the Copyright Act provides, but also recognize that we have also a lot of freedom within the Copyright Act. Libraries have a lot of freedom. There's fair use, which gives us an enormous amount of flexibility in how we make material accessible. And we staked our understanding of the ability to provide emergency access during the height of lockdown and shutdown around fair use, right? And understanding that what we were doing was not having a kind of a detrimental effect on the users, the rights holders there. And then there are areas where we've made available collections or materials under certain circumstances for large-scale computational access, also fair use for users who have print disabilities. It is a fair use, but it doesn't have to be, because it's enshrined in treaty and law that those users have a right to access these materials. Going forward, I want to say that I think it's absolutely vital that we continue to look at how we can make the 60% of that collection that is currently very limited access more available under more circumstances. And I think I can't say exactly how that's going to look or what those services are going to look like yet. I think we're going to try to undertake with one of our key partners research project over the next couple of years that's going to look into both the current contemporary needs of users for digital content, as well as the legal frameworks under which that material can be made accessible. And within that, I actually think there's a lot of room for us to look at avenues for sharing access to collections under existing exceptions of the law. So document delivery, interlibrary loan, those are very well established and common practices and commonly accepted practices. And I think there ought to be ways for us to develop services that can use the collection to help satisfy user requests in ways that are not unlike that, if not like that. And I want to be very careful here, because I can't say, oh, yep, we're working on that, it's going to be launched in March. As the more I have talked with colleagues around the country, I've been working on a NISO working group around collection sharing of copyrighted material as well. And we've talked a lot about this, and the intricacies and the challenges in the system level are pretty significant. And so that's not to say we're not going to do it. It's just to say that it's going to take some time to think through. But I'm really committed to this, right? I mean, I think since I've gotten here, it's one of the things that's really chafed at me is, how can we get more out of that collection? How can we make that material more accessible? And you can't transform the community as much as we would like to do unless we could take greater advantage of access to that material, I think. So
yeah, I completely agree. I think ETAS during the pandemic changed the way our faculty and students think about their preferences for access. And I think when we turned ETAS off, it was felt, the impact and the loss of that access. It wasn't that they didn't want the print copies at all, but they definitely responded to the convenience and the ease of access of ETOS. And I would also say that our print collections at the stage of the pandemic that we're at right now are the circulation is remarkably low. It has not rebounded. So I don't know what that says about use, but I think the research that you're going to be doing for the HathiTrust strategic plan might want to look at some of the changing use patterns among the member libraries.
Yeah, and I think that's a critical part of that research project I was referencing a second ago that we hope to be able to work on starting in next year. So, by the way, Jenny, I just wanted to say, I know that we have been chatting happily away for a while, but I wanted to see if there were folks out there in the audience who had questions. Not to say I don't love your questions. I know we have other people here. So.
Right. I've been watching the chat, waiting for somebody to type something in, but
I did get one, Mike. Okay. This is Jessica here. I did get a question come in privately regarding shared print. So the discussion on shared print earlier focused on building shared print collections based on the digital content already in HathiTrust. How do you think Hathi's investment in shared print will grow over the coming years? And do you anticipate that HathiTrust will ever flip its approach, building shared digital collections based on shared print holdings of members?
So in other words, the shared collective collection, a shared collection becomes the driver for collection building or collection development. I think this is a question that I know that Heather Welton and the shared print groups have been talking about a lot. I think that's probably a really necessary way to approach it, right? Because if you make the assumption then that there is already there's already something known about that shared collection, about that committed collection, right? There's already data that helps understand what's the extent of the holdings, the relative commonality of it, rarity of it, and we can compare those collections with collections in HathiTrust with some degree of facility that helps us identify what Liz Ann Payne always said, don't call gaps in our collection. So I think that could be a real driver there. We've not yet approached it from that perspective. I do think that is like one avenue that we should look at as we think about how to take on more active work in developing the collection. But I think it's just one. But I think there is some opportunity in that. I don't know if I could say more than that at this point. So.
Yeah.
I hope that answered anonymous person's question. So.
It was Eric Mitchell.
Hi, Eric. Were there any others?
I don't see any at the moment, but I can always take people a few.
While we're waiting, maybe I could ask another one, which is about climate change. And again, this is something you've referenced. And climate change is a factor that's impacting libraries. So do you think that that's impacting HathiTrust as well, and in what ways, if so?
Well, yeah, it's definitely impacting us because I think it's impacting us individually. It's impacting all of us. It is the world in which we work. I think on a basic and kind of visceral level, I think that when we were launching emergency access in spring of 2020, we were really focused on the immediate public health crisis, but we were very conscious that we were probably putting into play something that would be necessary in other contexts. I think as we see worsening impacts of climate, we see increased numbers or intensity of certain kinds of natural disasters, hurricanes, or as you are well aware, Jenny, fires, right? There was a fire that threatened the Southern Regional Storage Facility a few years ago. There was a fire that destroyed substantial portions of the library at University of Cape Town in 2021. I think that continuity of access to materials, it just makes really clear and persistent, like how preservation, library access, library work and preservation is absolutely a necessary and more important and critical element of a response to climate change. It is not the only response, right? It is a fixing a symptom as opposed to addressing the causes of climate change. And on that front, I would say I think we have to acknowledge that we have an impact on climate, right? That the work that we do at HathiTrust is compute intensive. It uses electricity, we're not as computing intensive as certain kinds of work. We're not, mining cryptocurrency here. We're not running climate models, so that's great, but that's not enough, right? And I think that one of the things that we're trying to understand is what's the best way for us to audit that impact. Where would we be? How, when we make decisions about working with vendors, how do we make decisions? How do we evaluate climate impact or climate policy within that context as well? So I think that will be an increasingly important part of our decision-making over the next 5 years or so. And I think this is just one example of how the world is really a much more turbulent place, and we have to acknowledge that we have to kind of plan for that kind of uncertainty and that kind of turbulence working going into the future. So that's a downer moment coming up at the end of this talk. So.
Well, but a positive spin on it is by having a member meeting that's virtual, maybe not every year, but whatever frequency gets established, people don't have to travel. So
Right.
that does help a little bit.
And I think that's been a huge impact on the community. I think really important one. I think that's really right. So.
Yeah. Okay, just seeing a comment from Daniel Dollar in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
About shared print and sort of next steps in access to in-copyright materials.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.
I'll refer everyone to that.
That's
So
right.
Jenny, I note I'm getting like a little ping from beyond here that's telling me our time is coming to a close and I need to move us to the next thing. But Jenny, I want to say thank you. These have been great questions. I've really enjoyed talking with you this afternoon and appreciate all the work you do with us on the Board of Governors. But this has been a great kickoff for this meeting, and I feel it is, especially because I'm the one on the stage here. So for me, it's been great. So thank you for that, and I hope for the rest of you, it's been awesome as well. I believe I am supposed to now hand this off to Jessica. Jessica, are you there?
Absolutely, that is correct. Thank you both. And so we are now moving into our first break, which is 10 minutes long. And I want to invite you to respond to our very first poll question. So which would you prefer? A live executive director update from Mike or a pre-recorded video? And if you've got some other feedback to share, you can do so in the meeting Jamboard, which is going to be posted here in the chat. And we will be back in 10 minutes. So that would be just a few minutes after 1:00 p.m. So at 1:02 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will see you back here for a conversation with the Board of Governors. Thank you.